Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. We're in Matthew chapter 23. We got down to, I believe, verse 23 last week. Now verse 23. This chapter is very interesting because he is really addressing the Pharisees and the scribes here and the way they had led the people and the misgivings they had given the people. And we've already studied some of the things about how they tried to, make it about themselves, and they wanted to be noticed, and all these things that they were doing wrong. So he continues that this morning when we get to verse 23. And he says there, "What do you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. You ought to have done these you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides, you strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." So this one says they had tithed the required elements. And he said that's good. You should do that. But he said you left out the weightier matters, in other words, the more important matters of the law. And that was to have love and mercy and justice. He said those things are weightier matters. He said you should have really concentrated on them without leaving undone, these other elements of worship that you should have done, but you've neglected those. And so why do you think they neglected the love and mercy and justice and just concentrated on the tithing of the other elements? Okay, it was the physical, outward show of worship instead of what they should have had in their heart. And so there's a lesson in that for us as well. And what is that lesson? Right. Take care of the matters of the inside, the love and mercy and grace, and those things we're taught to show. And, don't neglect the other parts of worship, assembling together and singing and praying and all the things we do that we're commanded to come together and do in what we would consider to be our physical worship. But he says, for us, we need to make sure that we don't just say, okay, I'm coming on Sunday and I'm marking off my list of, I came and I gave and I sang and I prayed and we had a lesson and I've done my duty, right? And guess what? Everybody saw me do my duty, right? But what happens the rest of the week? What happens the rest of the time? And it would be like us saying we don't need to neglect that coming together and that worship together. He wants us to do that. Yeah, that's what he commanded us to do. We need that. We need that worship and time together. But we need not forget that it's the biggest percentage of our time as a Christian is spent where? Outside. It's out there. And so outside of there, we need to be showing love to other people. And mercy to other people. And grace to other people. And doing the good deeds that people see outside of here, that really and truly, if you think about it, isn't that what brings more people to Christ than just bringing them to church? It's those good deeds, those things we do that we show them outside of that'll get them to, I want to be a part of it. Whatever that's causing this thing to happen, I want to be a part of that. And so he says, do those things, but don't neglect the other. And then he says they strain or gag at a gnat and swallow a camel. Now that's pretty extreme, one to the other end. Gagging at a gnat. You ever swallowed a small bug? What is it cause you? It's awful, isn't it? It's awful. And you say what you're doing is you're getting choked on this little gnat, but then you're swallowing a camel. You're letting these. You're so concentrated on these small things to be seen of men, but yet you're neglecting these other things you ought to be doing that are way more important in showing yourself to be a follower of God than just these little things. He said, you gagged at a gnat and then you swallow a camel. You let these other things, these weightier matters of what you should be, and really on the inside, what you should be, and on the outside you're trying to show things. And so he said, don't leave out these things, but don't make those other things so important that you leave these others out, because they are important. He goes on the next one. He kind of continues this in 25 when he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and the dish, that the outside of them may be clean also." So there again, he's showing the difference in being clean on the outside and clean on the inside. He said, you wash the outside of the cup, to make it look good, but on the inside, what's happening there? You're not cleansing it. And he said, so you need to be what you are on the inside. You need to cleanse that first. Get that clean, and the outside will take care of itself. So, if you're washing dishes, you get through a supper, and you're washing dishes, like I do every night. I might put one in the dishwasher, so you got a cup. You wash the outside of the cup. Is that enough? Why do you need to wash the inside?
Would you drink out of it?
Huh?
Would you drink out of it?
Would I drink out of it that way? No. but that's what he's trying to get them to understand. You're washing the outside, when really the most important part is washing the inside. That's where all the stuff is, It'd be like, washing a bowl you just cooked in, and washing the outside of it and leave everything else on the inside. What's going to be there when you come back to cooking it again? Green stuff, we used to go camping. If it had something green on it, we just scraped it off and ate it. It didn't really matter, but that's what he's saying. They were taking care of the outside. In other words, they wanted to take care of the things that men saw. It was this outward show of it, but he said the inside. You're neglecting the inside of it, and he gave them a good comparison here, because we would never do that. We would never wash the outside and leave the inside, dirty. But he said you're doing this physically yourselves. You're doing this to yourselves. You make yourself look good on the outside. And then he continues on with the same thing, the same thought in 29 when he says, "What do you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites? Because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore, you're witnesses against yourself that you're the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Servants, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell?" So they said, what had the forefathers of these men done that he's talking about here? What had they done? They killed the prophets. You go in the Old Testament days, when you study the Old Testament, and they sent the prophets in there to try to guide the Israelites, a lot of them they killed them. And so what these modern day Pharisees were doing, the leaders of the Israelites now, they were saying, now if we lived back in those days of our fathers, we would not have done that. And he said, what you're doing is you're witnessing your own fathers, guilt. You're witnessing, saying, acknowledging that they did kill the prophets. And they didn't acknowledge that this was God's word trying to get to them. So they killed the prophets. And then you're saying that if you'd have been there in those days, you would not have done that. But then he goes in the next section and says, I'm going to show you how you're wrong. He said there when he says, "Therefore indeed I send you prophets, wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and prosecute from city to city, that you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth from the blood of righteousness." He says, from Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berex, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Surely I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So, what does he say then about this next generation? What are they going to do? Same thing. Who are they going to put to death? The apostles, the disciples who were teaching Christ. All of these, he said, I'm going to send to you prophets and wise men and scribes. I'm going to send to you in your day and time. I'm going to send to you some people that are going to try to teach you the truth. And he said, you're going to kill them just like your forefathers did. And so what happened to all the apostles that were teaching Christ? They were martyred. They were all martyred for the cause, and they killed them. What did they do to Jesus, who came teaching them the truth? And you know, they beat him and crucified him. So he said, I'm going to send to you, and he did. He sent the prophets and sent evangelists and all these men to tell them the truth, and they did the exact same thing that their forefathers did. So he said, you're witnesses against your own forefathers, but you're going to do exactly the same thing. And they did. They said they killed him. Yeah.
Okay, with them. I was lost.
Okay.
I couldn't figure out where you were at.
Sometimes I lose myself too, so don't worry about it. Yeah. I actually skipped one part of that prior before that I'm going to go back and talk about. So I'm getting ready to lose you again.
That's okay.
But so it's amazing to me that they were so hypocritical in what they did. So hypocritical. But think about it. Can we be that same way today? Can we be that hypocritical today? If we're not careful, we can condemn other people for the same thing that we might be doing. Or we might be condemning other people and we're doing things that are worse. And so, when he told them, like we talked a few minutes ago, if we're not careful as Christians, we'll make a list of the things that we should do. All right, I was here Sunday morning, for Bible study. I was here for worship service. I was here Wednesday night for Bible study. So what have I done? I've checked my list. I gave them my means. Check my list. I sang. Check my list. I listened to that sorry preacher preach. Check my list. You know what we're doing when we're checking a list? We're putting things in line that we think we ought to be doing. And so many times we're leaving aside the other parts of it. We're doing the things that he warns us against. We're not showing love to others outside. We're not helping others outside. We're not doing good for others outside. We're not checking on each other, making sure each other are good. We're not doing what he called earlier to them, the weightier side of it, the love, the mercy, the grace, teaching, studying, doing these things outside. And so we have to make sure that we don't do like they were doing, because that's basically what they had done. They made themselves a checklist of things that made them look good, but then they left aside the love and mercy and all the other things they should have been doing from the inside. And so we need to make sure we don't do that as well. And this is where I'm going to go backward a little bit. He talked about them. It said that you whitewash tombs that appear to be beautiful outward. I'm in verse 27. They're to be beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so you also outwardly appeal righteous to men, but on the inside you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So their tombs back then were much like the tombs if you go to New Orleans and you go to tour a cemetery. A cemetery. I hope it's not a seminary. You go and tour a cemetery. And all of them have these tombs that are above ground because they're below sea level, so they can't bury like we have, cemeteries here where we bury 6 feet in the ground because they flood and all those things. So we walked through one day when we were down there, happened to come across a caretaker that was there, and he said, "Hey, what can I help you with?" So I said, "Well, we're just visiting. We're just curious about, the way you bury people." We told him he was from Tennessee. He gave us a tour about the whole place, and he told us all about it. He said, "Yes, this will be a family tomb, and it'll be a big, expensive-looking thing." But he said they'd take the family member, and when they die, there's a concrete slab. They take the face off of it, put that person on a concrete slab, seat it up. When the next person dies, they shove that body that goes down in the tomb and put the next body in. And that's exactly what he was telling them. That's the way they did it back then. You had family tombs. All the family was buried in this one tomb. And on the outside, it was beautiful. But on the inside, what was on the inside? Dead men's bones. Decayed bodies and dead men's bones. He said, so you're just like that. If you looked, where would you rather be? Standing on the outside looking at that monument or on the inside?
Well, you'd be dead if you're on the inside.
Yeah.
So you'll all be the outside.
I don't know. Maybe they do some people live in there. I don't know. But you think about, that's exactly how he was describing them. He said, you're just like that too. It's beautiful. And there were some beautiful, very ornate things there. But on the inside, it's all just full of dead men's bones. And that's what he described them. He said, you're on the outside, boy, you look like you're doing good. Remember the phylacteries he said they were wearing and all the things they were doing to make themselves look pious and holy. But yet on the inside, they weren't taking care of the inside. They didn't have the love they should have had and all the things you should have had. He said, you're just like that. You're full of dead men's bone on the inside. You're dead.
Did they have a list of the names of the people inside, or just put family off?
I think there is a list of names of people that are in there. You don't want your name to be on that list. They do have a list of, all right, here's the ones. But, you think about it, they just continued on, continued on. But that's what he said to them. He said, you've done all these things. When he talks about them murdering, he goes back to Abel and about the blood of the righteous. What happened to Abel? He was the first what? First murder. First murder. And he was killed for doing the right thing. And what happened to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed for what? Doing the right thing. So he said, you've shed the blood, and then this has happened all the way through history. From Abel, who was killed early on for offering the right sacrifice that God had asked him to offer. And because he did that, his was approved. Cain's was not. So what did Cain do? Killed him for doing the right thing. Same with all the prophets. They were killed for doing the right thing in God's service. All of the apostles were going to be killed for doing what? The right thing in God's service. There are people today across the world that are trying to worship Christ that are even being martyred now. It's hard for us to visualize that. Because we live in a country that's free and we can worship and we don't have to worry about, we may take a little persecution, but we don't have that to fear. But there's places that people have to go in to teach Christ under the guise of being something else. They can't go in saying, hey, I'm going to go in and I'm going to teach Christ. They have to go under the guise of being a teacher or whatever it might be and secretly teach Christ. And guess what happens if they're found out? Thrown in prison or killed. And so that's happening even today. And so that's what he said, you're just like your forefathers. Going all the way back to Abel. killing men for doing the right thing in God's service. And they were getting ready to do exactly the same thing. And then he goes into 37. And he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till I say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So, who is this he talking about when he said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem"? The Jews, the Israelites, his chosen people. He said, how many times would I wanted to gather you under my wings like a chicken gathers her wing? What does a hen do when it's got up a storm and she's got baby chickens? They all gather, right, under the hen, and she protects them with her wings. He said, how many times did I want to do that for you? But you wouldn't accept it. You wouldn't accept that protection I was willing to offer you because you were rejecting it. It said, so he says, your house is going to be left to you desolate. What house is he talking about? When he says, your house is going to be left to you desolate. Huh? The household of faith. And I think he's talking there about the temple. He's talking about, because remember, the temple is going to be destroyed not too long after Christ is gone. You know, the temple, the Romans are going to come in and they're going to destroy the temple that's there. And he says, so your house is going to be left to you desolate. And what was significant about the temple to them back then? It was God's place, wasn't it? It's where God met with them. It's where they were taught. It's where where God came and met with them. It started out with the tabernacle and all the way up to the temple. And he said, your temple that they held so, in awe, he said, it's going to be left desolate. And it was. It was left desolate. And he said, you will see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so when Christ left, when were they going to see him again? When he comes back again. Same time, guess what? Same time we're going to see him again. When he comes back and says, we'll meet him in the air, he said, that's when you're going to see me again. He was kind of predicting his own death at that point at their hands. Because they were fixing to kill him and do away with him because he was a threat. He was a threat to them and who they were. So I'm sitting here as I was reading all of this. I mean, you think about this is a whole chapter of Jesus just letting them have it. I mean, I wonder what they were thinking the whole time Jesus is talking to them.
Who does he think he is?
You know, did any of them take it to heart, I wonder? Because in reality, he was telling them the truth. And the hardest thing for us to accept is what? The truth. To look in the mirror and say, you know what? That's true. What they're saying is true. And he was telling them the truth. And I just wondered, were they even trying to argue? Were they, of course, this even made them even more angry with him. So, and there again, but he was trying to make the point to them of what was important, and that was what's on the inside was so much more important. Having your heart right and being righteous, that's what's going to be show on the outside. Because whatever's on the inside comes out, doesn't it? It comes out. So that's what he was trying to teach them. You need to be cleansing the inside, the love, mercy, grace, and all those things, and not so much trying to look good on the outside for them. So any more comments on all of these things he said or taught?
The Old Testament talks about the high priest having the authority and the once a year redemption or whatever, to go back and do it again. But they have the pomp and circumstance and the authority. And these Sadducees and Pharisees, they fed off of that authority in the community by being out there and enforcing the law and judging and whatever. And they had their level of hierarchy that they must be more godly than everybody else. But you just wonder, you never hear about the heart or soul or caring or anything in the Old Testament, strictly blood and guts and offerings and how great that priest is. You may see some charitable things going on, but it was never magnified. It was always the big look what I've done situation, not the small things you do. I'm just wondering, I'm not defending the Sadducees and Pharisees, but they fed off of that, and now they're being told, we don't do that anymore.
So the way they worshiped back then was different. And they're coming to the priest, and the priest prayed for them and all those things. However, when you look at the old law did teach the same principles taught in the New Testament. And number one was, if you go back to the Ten Commandments, their relationship with God was number one, but your relationship to your neighbor was second. And so if you look at that commandment, when the young man asked Jesus what's the greatest command, first is, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. The second one is love your neighbor with yourself. The old law was based on those two, just like our law, our guidance today is based on those two principles. But they ignored the part about loving your neighbor and doing the good things. They became very pious. They were holier and more righteous than anybody else. And that's why today in some religious circles, it's very dangerous when you start putting people up on a pedestal. Because when you come to the New Testament church, who's on a pedestal? Jesus. That's it. There is none of these positions like they had then and all those things. So, but it's still tempting for men to want to do what? Show themselves, to outwardly be the right person, but inwardly they're not. So, yeah, they had a different type of worship, but, we kind of have the same type of things going on. Not so much in the church, but in other religious areas where the pomp, the circumstance, the hierarchy is there, but the everyday of doing what you should do is not there. And that's really what he was teaching them. We need to be watching what we do every day. Nobody's more important than the other. So, good lesson today. We'll start chapter 24 next week. We'll do chapter 24.